There comes a moment in your life where something inside of you begins to change, quietly and almost invisibly, and yet in a way that slowly starts to affect everything you thought you understood about yourself and the life you have been living. You wake up in the same place, surrounded by the same people, moving through the same routines, and yet something feels different. Not necessarily better or worse, but undeniably unfamiliar, as if the world has remained the same while you have not. The things that once made sense to you, the things that once gave you direction or even comfort, begin to feel strangely empty, as if they no longer carry the same meaning they once did, and the life you carefully built over time starts to feel distant, almost like something you are observing rather than truly living. And you cannot fully explain why this is happening because on the surface nothing has really changed, and yet deep down there is this quiet, persistent feeling that something within you is shifting, rearranging itself in ways you do not yet understand. Carl Jung once described this as a necessary phase of disorientation, a moment where the structures of the old self begin to dissolve, not because something is going wrong, but because something deeper is trying to emerge. But when you are inside of it, it does not feel like transformation. It feels like confusion, like losing your sense of direction, like becoming someone you no longer recognize, and that can be deeply unsettling. So naturally, the mind tries to make sense of it. It tries to regain control. It tells you that you need to fix this feeling, that you need to get back to who you were, that something must have gone wrong along the way. But what if nothing has gone wrong at all? What if this discomfort, this confusion, this subtle disconnection from your old life is not a sign that you are falling apart, but rather a sign that your life is beginning to align with something more real, more honest, more true to who you actually are? Because right before your life changes in a meaningful way, right before you step into something deeper and more authentic, there are always signs, quiet and often misunderstood signals, that something within you is shifting. And if you are experiencing these signs right now, even if they feel uncomfortable or confusing, this is not the end of who you are. This is the beginning of who you were always meant to become. Sign 1. You feel lost, but in a different way. At first, it simply feels like you are lost, like you no longer know where you are going or who you are supposed to be. But if you pay close attention, you begin to realize that this kind of feeling is different from anything you have experienced before. It is not the kind of confusion that comes from lacking direction or not knowing what decision to make. It goes much deeper than that, because it is not just your path that feels unclear. It is your entire sense of self that begins to shift. The person you used to be, the identity you carried for so long, the roles you played and the way you defined yourself in relation to others, all of it begins to feel strangely misaligned, as if it no longer fully represents who you are becoming. It is like wearing something that once fit you perfectly, something that once felt natural and comfortable, but now feels tight, restrictive, almost chuged, as if it was never truly yours to begin with, but something you learned to wear over time. And this creates a very uncomfortable in-between space, because you are no longer who you used to be, but you are also not yet fully connected to who you are becoming, which leaves you in a kind of psychological limbo. You may find yourself drifting through your days with a sense of detachment, feeling like you are observing your own life rather than fully inhabiting it, as if there is a quiet distance between you and everything around you. And what makes this even more difficult is that the mind desperately wants clarity. It wants certainty. It wants to define who you are and where you are going. But during this phase, those answers are simply not available yet. So the natural impulse is to escape that discomfort, to return to what is familiar, to pick up the old identity again, the old habits, the old way of being, simply because it feels safer than staying in the unknown. But if you resist that impulse, even just a little, and allow yourself to remain in this uncertain space without immediately trying to fix it, something very important begins to happen. Because this feeling of being lost is not actually a sign that you have lost yourself. It is a sign that you are in the process of letting go of everything that was never truly aligned with who you are at your core. And that process is not comfortable. It can feel disorienting, empty, even a little unsettling, because you are shedding layers of identity that once gave you a sense of stability. But that emptiness you feel is not meaningless. It is not something to fear. It is space. Space that is being created for something new to take shape. Something more authentic. Something that is not built on expectations or fear, but on a deeper connection to yourself. So if you feel lost right now, if things no longer make sense in the way they used to, if you no longer recognize yourself as clearly as before, do not rush to fix it. Do not force yourself back into an identity that no longer fits. Because this version of being lost is not the kind that leads you away from yourself. It is the kind that slowly, quietly, and sometimes painfully brings you back. Sign 2. You start outgrowing people. One of the most painful and confusing signs that your life is beginning to shift does not always come from within you, but instead reveals itself quietly through the way your relationships begin to change, almost so subtly at first that you can barely put it into words. Because over time, without any clear moment where everything suddenly breaks, you begin to notice that the way you connect with certain people is no longer the same as it used to be. And this realization can feel both distant and deeply personal at the same time. Conversations that once felt effortless and natural now seem to require energy, as if you are somehow forcing yourself to stay engaged, while moments that once brought you a sense of belonging begin to feel strangely empty, almost like you are present physically, but not fully there emotionally. And what makes this so confusing is that nothing on the outside appears to have changed, because the people around you are still the same, the dynamics are still familiar, and yet something within you has shifted in a way that you cannot ignore anymore. There is a subtle but undeniable change in what you resonate with, in what you can tolerate, in what feels meaningful to you, and as a result, things that once felt normal or even comforting begin to feel misaligned, as if they no longer match the person you are slowly becoming. You may find yourself sitting in conversations, listening, responding, even smiling at the right moments, while internally experiencing a quiet sense of distance that you cannot quite explain, as if a part of you has already moved somewhere else, somewhere deeper, somewhere more real. And this is often where the guilt begins to surface, because you start questioning yourself, wondering why you no longer enjoy what you used to enjoy, why certain people no longer feel the same, and whether there is something wrong with you for feeling this way. But the truth is, nothing is wrong with you, because what you are experiencing is not disconnection in the way you might think. It is transformation. and transformation inevitably changes the way you relate to the world and the people in it. As your inner world evolves and becomes more aware, more sensitive, more aligned with what is real for you, it naturally begins to highlight everything that no longer fits. And that includes relationships that were built around a version of you that is no longer fully present. And this is where the tension arises, because growth does not only bring expansion and clarity, it also brings loss. Not always in a dramatic or obvious way, but in a quiet, gradual distancing from what once felt familiar and safe. It is not that these people are doing anything wrong, and it is not that you are suddenly better or different in a superior way. It is simply that the version of you who once connected so easily within those dynamics has changed, and as a result, the connection itself begins to shift. This can create a deep sense of loneliness, because even though you are moving closer to something more authentic within yourself, it can feel like you are simultaneously drifting away from others, as if you are standing between two worlds, no longer fully belonging to the old one, but not yet rooted in the new. And within that space, there is often a quiet internal struggle, because part of you wants to hold on to what is familiar, to maintain those connections, to avoid the discomfort of change, while another part of you knows almost instinctively that you cannot go back to who you used to be just to make others feel comfortable. So you remain in this in-between state, where you are still present in your relationships on the surface, but internally you begin to withdraw, not out of rejection, but out of a deeper need to stay connected to yourself. And what you begin to realize, perhaps slowly and without fully admitting it at first, is that what you are longing for now is not just connection, but depth, authenticity, and a sense of real alignment that goes beyond surface-level interaction. And once that longing becomes clear, it becomes increasingly difficult to engage in conversations or relationships that require you to disconnect from yourself, because what once felt acceptable now feels draining, almost as if it is pulling you away from something important within you. For a long time, you may have adapted yourself in order to fit into certain dynamics, softening parts of who you are, ignoring your intuition, or staying in relationships that did not fully nourish you, simply because it felt safer than facing the discomfort of change or the possibility of being alone. But now, something in you is no longer willing to do that. And that shift, although quiet, is incredibly powerful, because it means that you are beginning to choose alignment over attachment, truth over comfort, and authenticity over familiarity. And as you make that shift, even unconsciously, you will naturally begin to outgrow anything that requires you to be less than who you are, and that includes relationships that are no longer in resonance with your inner world. This process can feel like loss, like distance, like becoming more alone at a moment when you are becoming more aware. And that contradiction can be difficult to hold because it challenges your need for connection while deepening your relationship with yourself. But what is actually happening beneath the surface is not disconnection, it is the creation of space for new relationships, new dynamics, and new forms of connection that are aligned with who you are now, rather than who you used to be. So if you find yourself experiencing this shift, if certain people no longer feel the same, if conversations feel heavier, or if you notice yourself pulling back without fully understanding why, do not rush to judge it or fix it. Because sometimes the distance you feel from others is not a sign that you are losing connection, but a sign that you are finally returning to yourself. Sign 3. You feel emotionally exhausted. Another sign that you are on the edge of a deep transformation is a kind of exhaustion that cannot be fixed with rest. A heaviness that lingers even after you sleep, as if your body may recover. But something deeper within you remains tired in a way that is difficult to explain. It is not just physical fatigue. It is not simply the result of doing too much or sleeping too little, but rather a deeper, more persistent sense of emotional exhaustion that seems to follow you throughout your days, quietly influencing the way you think, feel, and respond to the world around you. You may notice that things that once felt easy now require effort, that interactions that used to feel natural now drain your energy, and that even small tasks can feel overwhelming, not because they are difficult in themselves, but because you no longer have the internal capacity to engage with them in the same way. And this can be confusing, because from the outside, your life may not look that different. Your responsibilities are still there. Your routines may still be the same. And yet, internally, something has shifted, and the energy you once used to move through your life no longer feels available to you. So you begin to question yourself, wondering if you are becoming lazy, unmotivated, or weak. Questioning why you cannot seem to function the way you used to, and why even the simplest things sometimes feel like too much. But what you are experiencing is not laziness, and it is not a lack of discipline. It is the natural consequence of carrying too much for too long, of constantly adapting, suppressing, performing, and pushing yourself in ways that may have once been necessary, but are no longer sustainable. Because for a long time, you may have been operating in a state of constant engagement, always thinking, always responding, always adjusting yourself to meet expectations, to maintain relationships, to keep everything together, often without even realizing how much energy that actually required from you. And now, something in you is beginning to say no to that pattern. Not loudly, not dramatically, but through exhaustion, through a quiet withdrawal of energy from anything that no longer feels aligned or meaningful. You may find yourself withdrawing more, needing more time alone, craving silence, not because you want to disconnect from the world, but because you are trying to reconnect with yourself in a way that has been missing for a long time. And this can feel uncomfortable, especially if you are used to being productive, engaged, or constantly moving forward, because now your system is asking you to slow down, to pause, to feel, and that can bring up a lot of resistance. You might notice that you have less tolerance for superficial conversations, less patience for things that feel inauthentic, and less energy for roles or expectations that require you to be someone you are not, because your system is no longer willing to spend energy on what does not truly matter. And this is where many people misunderstand what is happening, because instead of recognizing this as a form of recalibration, they interpret it as failure, as a loss of motivation, or as something that needs to be fixed as quickly as possible. So they try to push through it, to force themselves back into their old rhythm, to ignore the signals their body and mind are sending. But that only deepens the exhaustion, because it goes against what is actually needed in this phase. Because this exhaustion is not a sign that something is wrong, it is a sign that something is ending, a way for your system to withdraw energy from patterns, roles, and ways of being that are no longer sustainable, so that it can be redirected towards something more aligned. It is a kind of internal reset, a moment where your energy is no longer available for everything, but becomes selective, intentional, and much more connected to what truly matters to you. And yes, this phase can feel heavy. It can feel slow. It can feel like you are not moving forward in the way you used to. But beneath that stillness, something important is happening. Because you are no longer living on autopilot. You are no longer endlessly giving your energy away without awareness. You are beginning to feel the cost of everything, and that awareness is what ultimately allows you to change. So if you feel emotionally exhausted right now, if you feel like you have less energy for the world and more need to turn inward, do not immediately try to fix it or judge it, because this exhaustion is not here to stop you. It is here to guide you. It is showing you very clearly and very honestly where your energy has been going, what has been draining you, and what can no longer continue in the same way. And if you listen to it instead of fighting it, it will slowly begin to lead you back to a way of living that is not based on constant effort, but on alignment. Sign 4. You question everything. At a certain point in this process, something shifts even deeper, and it is no longer just your emotions or your energy that begin to change, but the very way you see your life, your choices, and the meaning behind everything you have built up until now. You begin to question things that you once accepted without hesitation, things that once felt obvious, stable, and certain, and now suddenly feel unclear, almost as if you are seeing them for the first time from a completely different perspective. The path you are on, the work you are doing, the relationships you are in, the goals you have been chasing, all of it comes under quiet but persistent examination, not because you are trying to overthink, but because something within you is no longer able to ignore the deeper questions that have been waiting beneath the surface. You may find yourself asking, sometimes out of nowhere and without any clear trigger, questions that feel both simple and unsettling at the same time. Is this really what I want? Is this the life I chose, or the life I adapted to? Why does something that looks right on the outside feel so empty on the inside? And these questions do not always come with immediate answers. In fact, more often than not, they open up even more uncertainty, because once you begin to see things differently, it becomes difficult to return to the comfort of not knowing. There is a kind of awakening that happens here, not in a dramatic or mystical sense, but in a quiet, almost sobering realization that much of your life may have been shaped by expectations, by conditioning, by unconscious patterns that you never fully questioned before. And that realization can feel both liberating and destabilizing at the same time. Because on one hand, it opens the door to a more authentic way of living. But on the other hand, it challenges everything that once gave you a sense of direction and certainty. You may begin to notice that things you once valued no longer carry the same importance, that goals you once pursued with determination now feel empty or disconnected, and that the version of success you were moving toward no longer feels meaningful in the way it once did. And this can create a deep internal tension, because you are still standing inside a life that was built by your previous self, while simultaneously feeling the pull towards something that has not yet fully taken shape. So you exist in this paradox, where nothing feels entirely right anymore, but nothing new feels fully clear either. And that can be one of the most uncomfortable places to be. Because the mind wants resolution, it wants clarity, it wants to replace one answer with another as quickly as possible. But this phase does not work that way. It asks you to stay in the questions without rushing into premature answers. And that requires a different kind of strength, not the strength to act or to push forward, but the strength to sit with uncertainty, to allow things to unfold without forcing direction before it is ready to emerge. Because what is happening here is not confusion in the negative sense. It is a restructuring of your internal world, a process in which old beliefs, old values, and old definitions of meaning are being questioned so that something more authentic can take their place. And this process cannot be rushed because it is not about replacing one identity with another. It is about uncovering what was always there beneath the surface, beyond the expectations and patterns you have carried for so long. So, if you find yourself questioning everything right now, if things that once felt certain now feel unclear, if you are no longer satisfied with easy answers or surface-level explanations, do not interpret that as a problem. Because this questioning is not here to destabilize you without purpose. It is here to deepen your awareness, to bring you closer to a life that is not built on autopilot, but on conscious choice. And even though it may feel uncomfortable, even though it may feel like everything is being shaken at once, this is often the moment right before clarity begins to emerge. Not the kind of clarity that comes from external validation or simple answers, but the kind that comes from within, slowly forming as you allow yourself to move through the questions instead of escaping them. Sign 5. You feel pulled toward something you can't explain. At a certain point, after the confusion, after the exhaustion, after the questioning, something begins to shift again, but this time in a way that feels quieter, subtler, and yet strangely powerful. Because alongside everything that feels uncertain, there also begins to emerge a feeling that is difficult to explain, a kind of inner pull, a quiet sense that you are being drawn toward something, even if you cannot yet fully see what that something is. It is not a clear vision. It is not a detailed plan, and it is not something you can easily explain to other people. But it is there, beneath the surface, like a subtle knowing that something new is waiting for you. You may feel it in moments of stillness, in brief flashes of clarity, in certain thoughts or ideas that seem to appear out of nowhere, as if they are not coming from the same place as your usual thinking, but from somewhere deeper within you. And even though it may not make logical sense, even though it may not fit into the life you are currently living, it feels real in a way that is difficult to ignore. There is a growing sense that you cannot continue the way you have been, not because something is forcing you to change, but because something within you is gently pulling you forward. And this pull is not loud or urgent. It does not demand immediate action, but it remains present, consistent, and quietly persistent, as if it is waiting for you to trust it. You may begin to feel drawn toward different environments, different ideas, different ways of living, things that resonate with you on a deeper level, even if you do not yet fully understand why. And at the same time, you may notice that what once held your attention no longer has the same grip on you, as if your energy is naturally shifting away from what is no longer aligned, and towards something that feels more true. This is not something you can force or control. It is something that unfolds gradually as you become more connected to yourself and more willing to listen to what you feel rather than what you think you should do. And that is what makes this phase so powerful, because for the first time, your life is no longer being driven purely by external expectations or unconscious patterns, but by an internal sense of direction that is beginning to guide you from within. Even if it is unclear, even if it feels uncertain, even if you cannot yet see where it is leading, there is something deeply meaningful about that feeling, because it signals that you are no longer disconnected from yourself. You are beginning to trust something deeper, and that changes everything. So if your life feels uncertain right now, if you feel lost, disconnected, exhausted, and questioning everything you once believed to be true, do not rush to escape it. Do not try to force clarity before it is ready to emerge. Because what you are experiencing is not the breakdown of your life. It is the transformation of it. You are not losing yourself. You are shedding everything that was never truly you. And that process can feel uncomfortable. It can feel slow. It can even feel lonely at times. But beneath all of that, something is aligning. Something is rearranging itself in a way that is far more honest, far more real, and far more connected to who you actually are. So instead of resisting it, try to trust it. Trust the confusion. Trust the exhaustion. Trust the questions, and most importantly, trust that quiet pull you feel toward something more, because that feeling is not random. It is not meaningless. It is not something you imagined. It is the beginning of the life you were always meant to live. And if this resonates with you, if you feel like you are going through this shift, then make sure to subscribe, because this is just the beginning of a much deeper journey into understanding yourself and becoming who you were always meant to be.